The Long Road to Justice, and Why It's Worth It. Welcome back. I'm Adeline Atlas, 11 times published author and survivor of systemic abuse, and this is Free Legal, where we examine the real structure of power in Canada and why standing up to it is one of the most demanding, lonely, and transformative things a citizen can do. Today, we're talking about the long road, the stretch of time between the moment someone first decides to speak up and the day the system finally moves, or is forced to move. The road that doesn't show up in press releases or polished courtroom dramas. The one that isn't glamorous, isn't short, and isn't built for ease. It's the road most people underestimate. And it's the one that determines everything. When people imagine justice, they picture a clear, definitive moment. The verdict, the statement, the handshake, the gavel. But justice rarely arrives as a single moment. It arrives as a series of slow, grinding steps that test a person's patience, identity, endurance, and faith in their own reality. The first step often begins with clarity. A sharp recognition that something happened that should not have happened. It could be a rights violation, a lie from an authority, a betrayal by an institution, a breach of law, a misuse of power. That moment is a spark. It's clean. It's simple. It's the part of the story that feels most righteous. But once someone acts on that clarity, they quickly discover the terrain is nothing like the movies. Institutions are built like fortresses, not revolving doors. They don't swing open at the first knock. They require endless forms, patience, legal language, and stamina. And between that first spark and the distant horizon of accountability lies a long, unpredictable road. The beginning of this road feels like movement. Filing a complaint, submitting evidence, contacting oversight bodies. These steps give the illusion that the system is responsive. But this is only the front gate. Behind it, the process slows down to a crawl. The institution begins its quiet performance of control. Delay, procedural loops, technicalities, and polite stonewalling. This is the part most people aren't prepared for. They assume justice is about proving what happened. But the truth is, justice is also about outlasting the machine. Over time, the long road strips away illusions. It reveals that institutions don't move because something is wrong. They move when someone refuses to leave. They move when their silence stops being cheaper than their response. They move when the persistence of one person becomes more expensive than compliance. That persistence is not easy to hold. It costs energy, money, years of life, friendships, health, and moments that can never be retrieved. And it's precisely this cost that the system relies on to make most people give up long before anything is resolved. The long road does something even more subtle than exhaust your resources. It alters your sense of time. What began as a single fight becomes a lifestyle. Your weeks are organized around waiting for replies, checking deadlines, sending follow-ups, reviewing disclosures. The future collapses into procedural calendars. This is how institutions win by attrition. They make their stillness feel endless while making your endurance feel finite. Yet beneath that harsh reality lies something even more powerful. When someone stays on that road, when they walk through the silence, through the erosion of support, through the late-night doubts and early morning fears, they become something the institution didn't plan for. They become inconvenient. They become expensive. They become evidence that the machine's quiet power isn't absolute. Institutions are not used to people staying. They're used to people fading. The mere act of staying shifts the balance, even before any decision is made. The long road also reveals truths about human behavior. When you first step forward, people may cheer. They admire courage from a distance. But as the months pass, the crowd thins. Friends stop asking for updates. Some distance themselves quietly. Some fear proximity. Others grow impatient with how long justice takes. This part of the road is heavy because it is lonely. But that loneliness isn't proof that your fight has no merit. It's proof that you've crossed into territory most people never travel. Institutional resistance is so normalized that your refusal to disappear makes others uncomfortable. That discomfort is not your problem to solve. Another challenge comes from the quiet war inside your own mind. At the beginning, your purpose is sharp, but the longer the fight stretches, the more the system's pace tries to rewrite your internal narrative. It whispers through silence. Maybe nothing will change. Maybe you're making it too big. Maybe it isn't worth it. These are not the words of truth. They are the echoes of the architecture itself. Delay is not neutral. It is a form of pressure. It's meant to soften your will, to make you question your clarity, to make you surrender not to logic, but to exhaustion. But here's what most people don't see from the outside. The longer the road, the more dangerous your endurance becomes to the institution. When you refuse to disappear, you turn their silence into a liability. You turn their delays into a record. Every unanswered letter, every postponed date, every procedural sidestep becomes part of a paper trail they can no longer control. That's the quiet power of staying. Justice that arrives after years of endurance doesn't just settle one case. It shifts the air around the institution. It tells every other citizen watching, even the silent ones, that power can be forced to answer. It sets precedent in a way that transcends the single name on the file. This is why the long road is worth it, even when it doesn't feel like it in the middle. There is another layer to this fight that isn't talked about enough. the personal transformation that happens along the way. Fighting an institution doesn't only reveal the system, it reveals you to yourself. It shows you where your fear sits. It shows you how your nervous system reacts to prolonged uncertainty. It exposes the narratives that others tried to implant about what you can or cannot do. It reveals who around you values truth and who values convenience. It reveals how much power your own voice holds, not when the world agrees with you, but when it doesn't. These are not comfortable lessons, but they are real. And they're the kind of lessons most people only learn by walking this road themselves. Many underestimate how many skills and strengths emerge from this kind of endurance. By the time someone reaches the end of a legal fight, they've often learned how to read legislation, how to track paper trails, how to speak precisely under pressure, how to hold composure in institutional spaces, how to document methodically, how to map timelines like a strategist. The system may never praise you for these skills, but they're real, and they don't disappear when the case closes. The long road also sharpens your discernment about justice itself. You begin to see the difference between moral justice, legal justice, and institutional outcomes. You see how law bends, how procedure shields power, and how real accountability often arrives not as a headline, but as a slow, forced shift. This clarity changes you. It doesn't make you naive. It makes you strategic. It teaches you how to move through institutional structures without letting them crush your sense of self. It's worth saying clearly, staying on the road doesn't always lead to the outcome you dreamed of. Sometimes the victory is not a courtroom win, but a public record, a formal acknowledgement, an investigation that cracks open a door for someone else. Sometimes the victory is making them say out loud what they worked hard to keep quiet. These outcomes may look small to the outside world, but inside the system, they're tectonic shifts. And then, there are the quiet victories that don't make legal headlines at all. The moment an institution finally has to respond after months of silence, the moment an officer is forced to disclose a file, the moment an internal decision becomes public record, the moment they realize you haven't disappeared like they expected you to. Every one of those moments is a fracture in the architecture. Enduring the long road also reclaims something that many people lose under institutional weight: agency. When power ignores you, it tries to define you as passive. But when you stay, document, push, and refuse to fold, you are actively rewriting the script. You are forcing power to acknowledge you exist. That acknowledgement doesn't erase the exhaustion, but it restores a piece of your dignity, the kind that institutions quietly try to strip away. People often ask whether it's worth it, whether the years of pressure, cost, and loneliness can possibly justify the outcome. That's a fair question. Only someone who's walked this road understands how heavy it is. The answer isn't simple. Sometimes justice looks like a verdict. Sometimes it looks like a change in policy. Sometimes it looks like one less person suffering in silence. Sometimes it looks like your own clarity standing taller than their silence. But almost always, the worth comes not from what they hand you at the end, but from the fact that you made them walk with you, inch by inch, when they expected you to vanish. The long road is also where precedent is born. Institutions rarely shift from moral persuasion. They shift because someone's persistence makes it impossible to ignore. That persistence echoes beyond the individual. It becomes the case future complainants cite, the moment a Crown attorney references in a meeting, the line that gets added to an oversight report, the example whispered in rooms where power calculates its risks. This is the quiet, structural legacy of those who endure. It's important to acknowledge the personal cost clearly, without romanticizing it. The long road drains energy, affects health, strains relationships, and reshapes lives. Pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But the cost of surrender also carries weight. The silent erosion of agency, the unspoken acceptance of their version of events, the lingering knowledge that power was left unchallenged. Between the cost of the fight and the cost of silence, many choose silence. Those who don't become part of history, whether the world knows their name or not. There's a point along this road when exhaustion becomes the loudest voice in the room. It whispers, "Walk away." And for many, walking away feels like the only rational choice. But what's often missed is that this whisper isn't just your exhaustion speaking. It's the system's design doing its job. Institutions know they cannot silence everyone directly, so they build walls made of time. They let exhaustion do the silencing for them. Every day someone endures beyond that wall is a day the structure shakes a little more. What makes the long road worth it isn't the guarantee of a perfect ending. It's the quiet certainty that your refusal to disappear forces accountability into spaces that would otherwise remain untouched. It's knowing that your persistence might be the reason someone else's fight takes less time in the future. Power doesn't yield to pleas. It yields to sustained, visible pressure. And you are that pressure. The finish line is rarely dramatic. More often, it's a quiet day when a letter finally arrives, when a decision is issued, when an admission is forced. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with relief, with a deep exhale, with the quiet knowing that what you did mattered, even if no one else fully understands the weight of what it took. And here's the thing. Justice doesn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. It doesn't have to undo the harm to still matter. The fact that you held your ground against an entire institution is its own evidence. It becomes part of the public record. It lives in precedent. It lives in the memory of every person who watched and understood. This is the real shape of justice: slow, uneven, exhausting, but deeply consequential. It isn't about winning like in a film. It's about forcing movement in spaces built to stand still. It's about refusing to accept invisibility as your ending. It's about leaving a trace in the record, not just for you, but for every person who comes after. I'm Adeline Atlas, and this is Free Legal. If you are somewhere along that road right now, somewhere between the silence and the finish line, this is your reminder that the road is long because power designed it that way. But your presence on it is already shifting its shape. You don't have to see the entire victory to be making history. Just staying in the fight forces change.